right. Well, I'm excited about our discussion today. And I imagine when you did the homework, it can be kind of surprising how, I don't know, racy the Bible can get. Is that the right way? This is kind of a weird story right there in the midst of Genesis. Probably not a story you want to develop for a children's Sunday school class. You probably just skip over this part, but we're going to look at it today. Judah and Joseph. And what I'm trying to do in the lecture is point out that there's a contrast between Judah and Joseph. That the contrast involves sexual purity and righteousness. That's on Joseph's part. And so the more he follows God, the more he's hated. And when he's in the land of exile and his boss's wife is making continual, constant advances toward him, Joseph won't give in, and eventually he goes to prison, having been falsely accused by her, all because he wouldn't sleep with her. You contrast that with Judah and the story we're going to see in Genesis 38, and Judah is just a debauched person. He just has one strike against him after another. And so it raises the question, why is it that Judah seems to get the blessing that was due Joseph? Joseph is the righteous one, but his righteousness seems to be given to someone who's unrighteous. And the principal thing that I've tried to argue in this class is that the Bible is a God-intended, meta-narrative, Christocentric, plot-symmetrical, elegant retelling over and over the story of Jesus. How we are to look at the contrast between Joseph and Judah is the exact way that sinners find blessing. We as sinners have earned judgment from God, and yet we get God's love and God's blessing. And the reason is because God is giving us what someone else has earned. That's what I'm trying to argue in these lectures, and that's what I'm trying to argue today. That the Christocentric meta-narrative is what will make these stories make sense, and I'm trying to make the case that this is God's intent. This is how God wants us to read this story, to continually ask the question, how is this story like Christ, or if it's bad, how is it a contrast to Christ? So that's what we're going to do this morning. And this story falls in a pattern where you have two sons. One is good and one is bad, and the bad one wants to kill the one who's righteous. So we saw that with Abel. Abel had inherently nothing to commend him to God, but he comes with the sacrifice that God had provided, and God accepted him as righteous. And what did his brother Cain want to do? His brother Cain wanted to kill him. And then we see that same hatred is there between Esau and Jacob. Jacob is the one who is being shown grace, and his brother hates him because of it, wanting to kill his brother. And then when Joseph, in his righteous life, brings back a report that kind of tells the truth about his brothers hate him. And so it's falling into this pattern that we've seen where the people of God are being persecuted. And with Joseph, he's being persecuted because he's righteous, because God had worked righteousness into his life. And so we see in Genesis 37:18, they saw him from afar. And before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. God had revealed the future, that Joseph was going to be the one, that he would rule as second in command to Pharaoh. He related the dream, and his brother said, well, let's kill him, and we'll see what happens to this dream. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and then we will say a fierce animal has devoured him, and we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Now, when they say, we'll say that this happened, we'll deceive, remember, that's exactly what Jacob had done. In fact, he had used clothes to deceive his father, and now Jacob's natural-born sons are going to use clothes to deceive their father. They took Joseph's robe, and remember, that's exactly the same word in Hebrew when God clothed Adam and Eve with these royal robes. So they took Joseph's royal robes and they slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. They sent the robe many colors and brought it to their father and said, we found this. Please identify whether this is your son's robe or not. And of course, Isaac's wife Rebekah had taken the clothes of Esau. So this is all family sins, and it's coming home to roost. He identified it and said, it's my son's robe, and he concluded exactly what they wanted him to conclude. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is, without a doubt, torn to pieces. And so here we have these wicked brothers. They are so callous that they're willing for their father to cry his eyes out, thinking his beloved son has been eaten by an animal. And they're doing it because they're hypocrites, spiritual hypocrites. And they're mad that Joseph's righteous life brought their unrighteous life into the glare of their father's spotlight. Now, this is where the story gets really interesting, and I'm trying to make the case that God intends us to connect this story with Jesus. So you get to be the audience, you get to be the jury, you decide whether I make my case or not. But I want to point out that the text tells us that Joseph is 17 years old when this happens. And why that's important, we're going to see. This is a very important detail. These are the generations of Jacob. What you need to know about Jacob is Joseph, right? Joseph is what the Jacob story is about. And Joseph was 17 years old, and he was pasturing the flock with his brothers. When you read it in Hebrew, you could translate that he was pasturing the flock and his brothers. There's a kind of little thing in the Hebrew language that gives you can read it either way. And I wonder if the other way isn't being intended, that his brothers are wicked and he's trying to help them be better people. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Remember, these are the two employees that Jacob had slept with and then produced offspring. Joseph brought a bad report to them to his father. He told the truth. This is what they're doing. This is how they're living. And their father scolded them for it. Now, here's why that 17 years old thing is important. If I can get my pen. Why this is such an important detail. The reason it's important is because when it says that his brothers sold him for 20 shekels of silver, according to the Old Testament, that's the valuation that you put on someone who's less than 20 years old. And here's the verse. Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, if anyone makes a special vow to the Lord involving the valuations of persons, then the valuation of a male from 20 years up to 60 years old will be 50 shekels. That's about $10,000 in our money. So if you make some kind of vow to the Lord and you've got to convert that vow to money, then the price of a person's life in terms of the money is going to be $10,000 if they're between 20 and 60 years old, kind of the prime of life. According to the shekel of the sanctuary, if the person is from 5 years old up to 20 years old, so Joseph being 17 years old, he's falling within that range, then the valuation will be 20,000 shekels, or about $4,000. Now, you read that and you say, well, why is someone worth more in the prime of life? And the Bible doesn't really give an answer to that. It may be that a person is more productive. I'm 58 years old. A couple of years, I'm going to be 60 years old. I can tell you this, I can't do anything like the work I could do when I was 20 years old. My son has a business, Fallen Trees Furniture. I help him out sometimes, and I'm good 3-4 hours, but then I'm shot and I'm not nearly as strong as he is. The Bible is recognizing that as people age, their productivity falls off, and maybe that's what's going on here. I don't know. But we have this chart with the valuations of persons, and Joseph at 17 years old is being sold for exactly what this chart would say that would be the valuation of his life. About right at $4,000. So the brothers are going to kill Joseph, but Judah comes along. And remember, we're going to contrast Judah's life with Joseph's life and see there is no comparison. Joseph is righteous. Judah is a terrible person. Judah says to his brother, what profit is there if we kill our brother? Let's don't kill him. Let's sell him. So in other words, Judah is the one who decides, rather than just kill him, we definitely want to get rid of him, but we won't actually make any money if we just get rid of him. So why don't we sell him into slavery? He'll be gone. We won't have to put up with his holier-than-thou attitude. We can live the way we want to live. We won't be compared to his life anymore, and we'll have the money. And so the Ishmaelites are coming, and his brothers listen to him. And so they sell him. That's why they sell him for 20 shekels, $4,000. Now, Marc Chagall has a wonderful painting of this that points out that they strip Judah naked before they sell him and throw him in a pit. They take off his clothes. They're doing the satanic thing of exposing nakedness. God covers nakedness. They're exposing nakedness. And I don't know, lots of Chagall paintings, even though he isn't a Christian, he'll sometimes put Christian symbolism in his painting. That's why I like Chagall so much. And I wonder if he isn't doing that here. Maybe it's just a tree, maybe it's the cross, I don't know. But it at least invites us to ask the question, is this like Jesus being stripped naked? Because they tear up his outer clothes and gamble for his inner clothes. Historically, people are crucified naked. We have recounts of that. And so I wonder if that isn't what's happening in the story, that they're stripping their righteous brother naked, throwing him in a pit, selling him. And if we're to think of Jesus being stripped naked so that he could clothe his bride with robes of righteousness. I think we're going to have an aha moment in about 2 minutes. You may have the aha moment before I actually make the connection, but remember the person who sells the righteous one. Remember, his name is Judah. She called his name Yada. He praises, or she explains it, I will praise the Lord. It's related to this word praise, but that's what his name means. Judah. In Greek, this is the way that you spell Judah. And I don't even think you have to read Greek to be able to read that, right? Eudas. Have you heard that name somewhere else? Eudas. You see, to a native speaker, the word Judas and the word Judah are exactly the same word. They aren't two different words. They're exactly the same word. And who sells righteous Jesus for money? It's Eudas does that. Now, I kind of wish, instead of translating his name Judas, we would translate his name Judah. Because I think if we translated his name Judah, we would get the biblical theology, because they're kind of going with the Greek sounding. That makes it difficult. But you see the text here. The word Judas and the word Judah are exactly the same word. And you can see it. I mean, for some reason in the Old Testament, they don't put the accents with names. They don't put them with any names. I'm kind of baffled why they don't do that, but you can see it's exactly the same word. Judah and Judas and Jude even, they're all the same word in the original language. And so we're told in the text that Judah, that's what I'm going to call him, goes to the high priest and asks, "What will you give me if I deliver him over to you?" And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. So Joseph, because he's 17 years old, got 20. Jesus is 30 years old, so he's between the 20 and 60, which means the valuation should be 50, but it's not. They pay 30 for Jesus. And the question is, why do they pay 30 for Jesus? The table that all the people are working off is the table we saw in Numbers, and you saw the verse, if you're over 20 years old but under 60, then the valuation in terms of a vow or something like that is 50 shekels, $10,000. But they don't give $10,000 for Jesus. They give $6,000 for Jesus. And the question I think that we have to ask is why? Why do they only give 30 shekels? Each shekel is worth $200. Why do they only give 30 shekels for Jesus? And this is why. If a person is a female, the valuation will be 30 shekels. So if you're 20 to 60, but you're a woman, in terms of that chart, then it's 30 shekels. And I can just hear my beloved interlocutor saying, aha, another example how the Bible is against women. The Bible is this patriarchal, women as victim story, and this is just one more piece of evidence that that's the case. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think the Bible is the most pro-woman document ever written because it describes the incarnation of the Son of God coming, dying for the sin of one glorious woman, the redeemed church, and then transforming her to be the empress of the universe. That doesn't seem anti-woman to me. Maybe in the culture, because women did not do the physical labor that men, maybe that's why. I don't know. We're not told why the valuation is what it is, but it's clear that when Judah betrays Jesus, the price the high priest pays for that is not the price due a man. It's the price due a woman. And they may be reasoning that, hey, Jesus might not really be a man. Listen, Jesus is the most manly man that ever lived. Jesus is the kind of man who'd flip over a table and make a whip and drive a crowd out of the temple. Jesus is the kind of courageous man who said, I will die, but my people are going to go free. This meek and mild kind of effeminate Jesus, that's made up by other people. That's not the Jesus of Scripture. But they're accusing Jesus of that. Or they may be using this verse, if an ox gores a slave, male or female, the owner shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver. So the high priests are offering either the price of a woman or the price of a slave when Judah betrays Jesus. And I think God in the meta-narrative is saying that Jesus willingly is giving his life for a woman who is enslaved to sin, but a woman that he means to free forever. You meant it for evil. God meant it for good. How do we understand the numbers? Is it part of an anti-woman bias? That's what Richard Dawkins would say. Or is it part of a Christocentric, meta-narrative, women-honoring, God-intended meta-narrative unity? I know which one of those which one of it gets my vote. There's a parallel between the lives of Judah and the lives of Joseph, a parallel contrast between sexual purity and righteousness and sexual impurity and unrighteousness. And all this is pointing forward to Jesus. So this is a story in Genesis 38, and it came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers. This is while Joseph is living a righteous life, while he's rising to second in command, while he's being thrown in prison for resisting his master's wife's seduction of him. It came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. So this is, in Hebrew, this is the, verbatim way you talk about people having sex. I don't know if he's marrying her, or if he raped her, or I don't know what's going on. But he took her, and the deal goes down. She conceived and bore a son and named him So he's married a Canaanite. And that's bad, right? You don't intermarry with Canaanites. The Canaanites are the people you're trying to get out of the promised land. You're trying to make Eden, the holy place for God, and the Canaanites are committed to sexual sin, to perverse sexual sin. We talk about that in the Canaanite fertility cult. And Judah, when he wants to get married, that's who he picks. A Canaanite woman. A woman whose entire family is given over to sexual sin. If we read the whole story, we're going to see that Judah's best friend, Hira, is also a Canaanite. We're going to see the text a little later that Hira is a Canaanite. And most scholars think the text is telling us that Tamar is a Canaanite as well. That the text doesn't actually come out and say that, but they are living in the area of the Canaanites, and these stories are repeating themselves. And so if Dad marries a Canaanite, then if he's finding a wife for his son, the assumption is that she's going to come somewhere from here. The text is inviting us to realize that she is a Canaanite as well. And don't take my word for it. This is the Anchor Bible Dictionary, kind of the standard academic interpretation of the Bible. And notice they just say in Genesis 38, the Canaanite woman who was married to was Tamar. So they're telling us, hey, she's a Canaanite. And this is what God said about Canaanites. You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons. That's what Judah had done. Or taking their daughters for your sons. Sorry, that's what he had done. For they would turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. So Judah is violating that. Judah violated it himself when he picked a wife, and he violated it when he picked Tamar for She conceived again and bore a son and called his name Onan. I didn't look this up in Hebrew, but I'm pretty sure that that's related to a bad thing like violence or wickedness. I know it says was wicked before God, and in Hebrew, remember how it said Noah found grace in God's eyes, and how those were an inversion of each other. I know the same thing is true of error and wickedness, that Moses is doing that same thing in the text. Was wicked before God. She called his name Shelah, the third one. Judah was in Chezev. I think this is related to the word lie in Hebrew. I didn't have time to look it up, but I think that's true. When she bore him. Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. Her name means something like the date palm, and evidently that's a very sweet thing. So like her name in Hebrew is like sweetie or something. Judah's firstborn was wicked, so that's the inversion in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. The amazing thing about this verse is there are a lot of wicked people in the Old Testament. There are people who burn their own children to Moloch. There are people who, do all these things, and God withholds judging them. This guy was so wicked that God killed him. This is a wicked, wicked, wicked person. So Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, raise up offspring for her. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So even though we haven't gotten this law yet in Leviticus at this point, evidently the law of levirate marriage was in effect. And levirate marriage said if a brother dies without children, then his brother takes that wife and they produce children, and then the children will be the brothers, but not the person who actually physically fathered the child. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems mega weird to me. And if you've got siblings and you think, well, I'm not sure I would really choose that, all that comes into play. We don't know why levirate marriage is there. Maybe it was some kind of welfare system so that widows would be taken care of by their children. I don't know. The law is there, and apparently Judah knew that law. And so he tells Onan to raise up children for his older brother But whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would do the deed, but he would do it in a way that this woman was never going to be pregnant. And it was wicked. And God killed him over it. God meant this to raise up children so that Tamar would be cared for, and Onan is using it just to have sex with another woman. It kind of sounds like Jacob and the employees to me. This looks like kind of family sin as well. The Lord put him to death. Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up," for he feared that he would die like his brother. In other words, Judah thinks that it's this wicked woman, Tamar, that's killing the boys. It never dawns on him that it's his wicked sons who are getting killed because they're wicked. He is blaming Tamar, and the truth is, it's his fault and his wicked son's fault. And you would think a decent father-in-law would have provided for Tamar to live in his house, but he doesn't because he's cheap. This is terrible. Tamar went and remained in her father's house. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. So if it originally was a rape, by the time we get here, he married her, or if it wasn't a rape, just a seduction, he does end up marrying her, but eventually that daughter of Shua dies. Judah was comforted. He went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. Now, Hira the Adulamite's a Canaanite, and they're going out in the middle of nowhere. If we were kind of hearing this story the way the original readers were hearing it, it would be something like this. Hira and Judah went up to Las Vegas for a business conference. It's like, okay, this probably isn't going to be a good thing that happens here. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah," let's read it as Las Vegas, "to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil. That's what prostitutes did. We're going to see that in the story. So she's dressing up like a prostitute. She sat at the entrance to the double well. This is where all the travelers were going to stop by. So she went and parked at the Welcome Center to Las Vegas or something like that. She saw that Shelah was grown up and had not been given to her. She had not been given to him in marriage. Now, I want to just ask you a question. What is she planning, dressing up like a prostitute? She's planning on getting slept with, right? Who is she planning on getting slept with? Judah. Now, here's my question. How did she know that Judah would sleep with a prostitute? Because she had been around Judah. She knew what Judah was like. She knew Judah was going out in the middle of nowhere. She knew what was going to happen. Judah is a terrible person. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me go into you." That's our sexual idiom. Again, the same one used of Bathsheba. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" He answered, "I'll send you a goat." Huh. It seems kind of weird to me. She said, "Will you give me a pledge until you send it?" He said, what pledge do you want? He said, well, your ring, your staff, and your belt. He gives it, the deed goes down. Rembrandt's version of the story, kind of creepy to me. It's violating a lot of laws here. Don't commit adultery, celebrate human sexuality within marriage, outside of marriage. Don't celebrate human sexuality. Judah is not following that. Judah is not following, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. And he would say, well, I didn't know she was my daughter-in-law. Right, you thought she was a prostitute. That makes it totally all right. As long as you thought she was a prostitute. For a while there, I thought you might be a creep or something. But, as long as she's a prostitute, hey, we're good to go. No, this is an abomination to God. Then she rose, and the story just gets more disgusting to me. Then she rose, went away, taking off her veil, put on her garments of widowhood. Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Canaanite to take back the pledge. He did not find her. Here the Adullamite asked the men of the place, where's the cult prostitute? Look at that. Who is at the double well? And they said, there isn't a cult prostitute here. You see, when it uses this term cult prostitute, it's using this very special word in Hebrew, kedusha or something. It's related to the word holy. So when Judah was sleeping with Tamar, he didn't think she was just a prostitute. He thought she was a Canaanite fertility cult prostitute. Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own. We'll be laughed at. You see, I sent the goat. I'm an honest guy. I promised the goat, I sent the goat. I'm a good person. I do what I promise, right? 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. In Hebrew, it says she's been a whore. I sometimes think we sanitize the Bible wrongly. She's been a whore. Moreover, she's pregnant by her whoredom. Judah said, bring her out and burn her. You know why he said that? That isn't what happens when people commit immorality. You stone them. The only person who gets burned for playing the whore is a priest. You see, Judah was saying, look, I'm a righteous person. I teach Sunday school at my church. I'm a deacon. I can't have my daughter-in-law be a whore because God's name would be profaned. So we can't just stone her. We got to make her an example. You can't have that. You can't have that kind of debauchery going on among God's people. Drag her out and burn her. And you read this story and you think, Judah, how in the world can you be such a hypocrite? 3 months ago, you were in Las Vegas sleeping with not just, a pretty woman prostitute. You were sleeping with what is like a sexually perverted, debauched prostitute. Now you're gonna kill your daughter-in-law and make her an example because you're this religious superstar. That kind of reminds you of the hypocrisy of somebody else in this story, doesn't it? As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law. She had planned this the whole time. By the man whom these belong, I am pregnant. So please identify whose these are. Signet, ring, a cord, and your staff, and a belt. Judah identified them and said, she's more righteous than I am. And you want to say to Judah, buddy, the bar isn't very high, right? She is more righteous than I am, since I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, twins were in her womb. When she was, isn't this just like the Isaac and Rebekah story all over again? So here's what we have: Onan, and Shelah. And so Judah sleeps with a Canaanite. And it isn't just any Canaanite, it's his daughter-in-law. So all these offspring are going to be incestuous, half Canaanite offspring. And so we have Perez and Zerah. Well, Zerah, his offspring is Achan. He's the guy who gets Israel cursed because he's greedy and takes the dedicated thing, and they end up stoning him. And then Perez has Boed, Obed, Jesse, and ultimately has David. You see, Judah isn't being saved because he's a good person. He's being saved because God showed grace to someone who did not deserve grace. The story of the Bible is helping us, inviting us to see that if we could see it all unvarnished, if we could see our lives kind of the way God sees our lives, this is what it would look like. The fallenness of our flesh is evil. The seeds of corruption that we inherited from Adam are evil. How is it that David can commit adultery with his near neighbor's wife? He did it because he got it honest from his forefather. We all get all of our sin honest from our forefather. And yet God is so gracious, rather than giving us what we deserve, is saying, there is a super Joseph out there who has lived a perfectly righteous life. And the more he's lived a righteous life, the more he's suffered for it. And I'm going to give you what he earned. And I want you to be generous, gracious, kind people as a result. That seems like a pretty reasonable request to me. That's where we'll pick it up next time. I'll see you then.